Alright guys, welcome back to another MCreator tutorial. So today what we're going to be looking at is deal damage 2. There's a couple different blocks. One is for items, which is the red one, and the other one is for entities. So we'll be looking at both of these blocks today and basically how they're actually structured. So let's get started. So to find these blocks, the first one that we have up here is the item one. So that one can be found under item procedures, actions, and then it is near the top here where it says deal damage or deal 1 and then damage 2, and then we have a provided item stack. This is where you can find that one. And the other one is found under entity procedures, actions, and then it should be near the top here. It will say deal 1 damage to, and then event / target entity from source, and then damage source of type, and then generic. So it's this one right here. All right, so we'll start with the item one because this one's a little bit more complicated to actually work with. So we'll start with that and kind of explain how it all works. So when you're working with a item, your procedure might not actually survive or support the provided item stack. So you might be able to switch this out with something like the right click or main hand item or something like that. And that will allow you to bypass that. As you can see, it just uses entity at this part. Item stack is usually used with item procedures and it might not be fully supported, but you can switch out the type of item. When you're working with this specifically, like if you were to pass it over to a item variable, for example, this will deal damage to the item variable rather than the actual thing. Even if you pass it over, say, to the item variable to like a main hand, you still need to pass it back over to a actual entity or something like that, right? So basically what you would end up doing is you would deal damage rather than the item stack to the actual right hand instead. Now if you were to happen to damage the variable, for example, like if you wanted to do it damage to the variable itself, you can pass it over by setting the stack. I believe there is a block in here somewhere that will allow you to set the specific item in the entity's inventory. So for example, if you had a inventory or something like that, I think there's one for main hand item specifically. So you could pass this directly over to the item after this. So for example, you would pass over the main hand item to a variable, set damage the variable, and then you would pass that variable back over to the hand. Now it needs to actually go back to the location where it happened if you're using the variables like this, because it will just basically damage the variable rather than damage the thing in your hand. So keep that in mind when you're actually working with that particular block. All right, so the next block that we have here is deal and then the amount damage to event / target entity from source, and then our damage type that we're going to be damaging from. So if you select the damage type, there's going to be a whole bunch of damage values in here. You can actually get that custom damage values once you've created them. They'll be at the top of the list here. By default, generic damage is just similar to just taking simple damage like being hit by or something like that. It's not like player damage, it's just like general damage and for entities and stuff like that. Generally you would be using this if you're working with mobs or certain damage values, but you can use your own damage types as well. Now the event / target entity, this one can be a variable as well. So if you were to pass over a mob, this could be done through other means or even passing it directly on. For example, it needs to be not a null value, so you would probably want to check to make sure that value is not null first. So we haven't covered not for like the null vault values. We will cover this in the near future, but I'll go into just a quick example. What you would do, you would check if it's not null, and that's through the / and then the equal sign. And then you could basically run this part. So after that, you would probably have something to pass over the entity to. One quick example of how that would work would be something like nearest neighbor or nearest entity, and we could pass that over to the variable. So something like this, and we would check it and make sure that it's not null, and then we would pass it over to the actual script here. So you would select something like, I don't know, living entity. Living entity is a entity type that basically affects all entities, so that would allow you to check for the nearest entity specifically, and then check if it's not null, because this is a null value. It can be null, and then we're checking passing it over to a variable, so that can be null. So we make sure that it's not null, and then we deal damage to an entity. So basically that's all you need to really know about damage. Damage is basically measured in half hearts when you're actually using it for players. Basically 1 half heart is 1 point, so that's pretty much the only thing that you need to worry about. Items, when it comes to items though, that is down to the how much durability the item has itself. Now, when you're working with durability, like for items and stuff, that's a little bit different, especially when you're working with custom items. I'll cover that in just a second. All right, so when you're working with a specific item, I just have a simple item element here. You would basically go ahead and set this value here to a positive number. So something like 144 would allow you to damage the item, and that would be the durability. We could set it to 256, so that would allow you to have 256 damage. You can get the exact values of all the different types of tools and stuff like that. For example, tridents are 250, crossbows are 326, and a few other things are in here, like wood tools are 59 uses. So once you have that set up, you would basically go ahead and be able to use the deal damage to. So this would basically allow you to actually apply damage to that item. Tools have a different kind of setting. They automatically have a number of uses and durability. And you can find the durability part right under here. And again, this is set by 100 by default. And generally you would have something like this value. And then once this tool is basically used or whatever, you can basically damage the item or whatever you want to do with it. So as far as entities are considered, damage for that is directly linked to their health. So we can actually take a look at the value where this is actually going to be affected by. If we go and create a living entity and go to the, I believe it's behavior, and there is one under here, which is the health value, which is this one right here. What we have here is basically how many half hearts the entity will have. Players have 20, so that's actually 10 full hearts, but each half heart is basically 1 point. So same thing with entities, you'll have generally about 10 for mobs. That is the general standard for things like pigs, cows, etc. is about 10 points or 5 hearts. You can also find all the health values on Minecraft Wiki, so all the documentation for all the hearts and stuff is on there. Other than that, if you are new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe, comment down below, rate the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace out.